Welcome to the PDB Situation Report. I'm Mike Baker, your eyes and ears on the world stage. All right, let's get briefed. We're kicking things off today with the dramatic escalation between Iran and Israel. You may have heard about it. After Iran launched a barrage of missiles at Israeli targets, the prospect of a full-scale war between two of the Middle East's most powerful militaries, well, it's on the rise. Joining us to break it down is Simone Ledeen, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Now, later in the program, we'll take a closer look at Israel's invasion of southern Lebanon, aimed at weakening Hezbollah's ability to wage war and pushing the group away from its border. Bill Roggio of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies will join us for more insight. But first, today's Situation Report Spotlight. Of course, we'll start with the big news this week. Iran launched a massive missile strike against targets in Israel on Tuesday. Israeli officials confirmed that its air defenses, alongside a coalition of U.S.-led allies, intercepted most of the approximately 180 ballistic missiles. However, a number of projectiles still managed to breach the country's aerial defense system. In the aftermath, Israeli authorities released an initial damage report showing minor damage to dozens of homes, other civilian infrastructure, and a few military bases. Fortunately, the casualties were limited, with the only confirmed death being a Palestinian man in Jericho who was killed by missile fragments from the attack. Iran justified the missile strike as retaliation for the recent deaths of senior leaders from Hezbollah and Hamas, groups that, of course, it supports in the region. And by support, I mean they entirely fund, train, and resource them. Just hours after the attack, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued a stern warning, saying, "Iran made a big mistake tonight, and it will pay for it," end quote. While he didn't elaborate on what that response will be, the situation is clearly far from over. Now, for more on the escalating conflict, let me bring in former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, Simone Ledeen. Simone, thanks very, very much for taking the time to join us here on the Situation Report.
Thanks for inviting me. Happy to be here.
Of course. Well, you'll change your mind after we talk for a while. So let's start with the big picture. This attack. What do you expect, or what do you believe we should expect from an Israeli response?
Well, a lot of people today have been talking about potential targets, and I think those are valid. I agree with you. Certainly, there will be a response, and I also happen to believe it will be significant. But if we're judging by what the actions that Israel's taken to this point, I think it's smart to expect the unexpected. They spent a long time preparing the battlefield in Lebanon, i.e., cutting off all the leadership of Hezbollah, and before they actually put boots on the ground, visible boots on the ground in Lebanon. And I think with respect to this next phase in Iran, I think we should expect to see the same thing. I mean, over the years, it's well understood that they have a significant network both in Iran and in Lebanon, and in Syria as well, by the way, which is also in place. So I think they're going to continue to combine their military operations, and by that I mean kind of the conventional military operations, with targeted special operations strikes, and continue to be incredibly innovative and impressive with their intelligence operations. So I think that's a starting point for me, anyway.
Okay. With that, the first attack from Iran into Israel that took place in April, there was a lot of talk about sort of the signaling that went on from the Iranian regime, and whether that was indirect, whether they advised the Saudis, knowing the Saudis would advise the U.S., whatever. Do you feel as if there was any of that going on prior to this? Because, I mean, the White House was pretty clear. They came out shortly before the attack and said, we believe an attack is imminent. Do you think the Iranian regime, in some effort to try to probably just keep their mullahs in power, do you think that there was any signaling about this latest attack?
I absolutely do. I think it was clear that there was, and thank you for bringing up the fact that it's the mullahs who are worried about their own grasp on power, their own grip on power. Everything that they're doing right now is with a clear eye to their domestic situation, which continues to be quite precarious. So yes, they did signal they were going to do this. I mean, just look at social media in the hours leading up to this attack. It was all over. Iran's about to attack. Iran's about to attack.
Yeah.
And so it was obvious that they were, and the reason that they signaled again was because they don't want a massive response, but they knew they had to do something, otherwise they looked weak because Israel just took out Nasrallah, who was, the leader of their largest terrorist army. So yeah, I mean, I think they're sort of bracing right now, and I believe they made a critical strategic error in taking the extent of what they tried to do yesterday was so significant. And I think with Israel now, the gloves are off, the mask is off. It's clear, really, Iran is the threat that they're dealing with. Before they had Hamas and Hezbollah kind of running interference for the regime, and now there's a moment where they're both significantly weakened and kind of off the field for a second anyway. And I don't know when Israel will have another opportunity like this to really take a significant toll and potentially even help topple the mullahs.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point that you're making there, because I mean, the whole point of the Iranian regime spending all this time and money and resources building this network of proxies, right, to pursue their objective, which is, they've stated it, they're not shy about it, the destruction of Israel, remove them from the map, was so that the regime itself in Iran wouldn't take the heat. They have some, lack of accountability for, however you want to put it. And now that veneer is kind of been pushed away. And you have to think that, as you pointed out, they're extremely concerned right now, particularly also because I think there's a great deal of fear and paralysis within the regime, the Iranian regime, over to what degree they've been penetrated by Israeli intelligence, right? I mean, the past several weeks have shown that, and it's not a short-term project. They've obviously been spending years doing this, but I think it's shown that their capabilities in understanding, as you pointed out, not just the Iranians, the Syrians, of course, the Hezbollah, Hamas, is astounding. Let me ask you this. Do you think, because the White House is spending a great deal of time right now trying to pull on the reins, right, and ensure that the Israelis don't have a disproportionate attack in their minds. Does the White House at this point, the Biden administration, do they have any leverage over Netanyahu?
I mean, isn't it sad that that's even a question?
Yeah.
I don't think they do, to be honest with you. I think looking back to several months back to when Israel was, we had sort of handcuffed Israel from entering Rafah, and there was that whole big, all eyes on Rafah, and this huge drama about what would happen if Israel entered Rafah. Really, none of which actually played out. Netanyahu and his cabinet at a certain point just went in anyway. And by the way, they got some of their hostages out alive. Unfortunately, they got some more of them out. They were murdered right before they were rescued, tragically. But it just goes to show you, and I think it was an important lesson for Israel as well. They're going to do what they need to defend themselves. And while the White House says Israel needs to do everything, we support Israel doing everything it needs to defend itself. The U.S. definition of what that is and the Israeli definition of what that is not the same thing. And I think the U.S. And the Biden-Harris administration sort of view of this is the status quo, returning to the status quo, where there's a threat to Israel from Gaza, from Hamas, and there's still a living threat to Israel from Lebanon in the north. And by the way, I mean, I think it's worth noting too that um, thousands of Israelis have been displaced from their homes in the north for almost a year now, because they fled after October 7th, fearing a similar
Hmm.
October 7th style attack from Hezbollah. And that's actually played out. Like now, the IDF troops that are in southern Lebanon are finding plans and weapons and things that Hezbollah was going to use in an October 7th style attack. So Israel, one of their stated goals of this war is to return its citizens safely to their homes in the north. And in order to do that, they've got to at least push Hezbollah north of the Litani River. And so have this buffer zone, which actually was supposed to be there anyway under a United Nations Security Council
Hmm.
resolution. But the bottom line is the status quo, the pre-October 7th status quo that this administration wants to return to is not acceptable to Israel. Israel will never return to that situation because they know how that story ends.
Yeah.
And so I think it's like dramatically unrealistic to try to make them do it because they're just not going to. And you're in this case, like they're never going to agree. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I think there's this sense that from the White House, and I think you're absolutely right that and we saw it shortly after 7 October, right? The calls for a ceasefire came very quickly from the White House and of course from the international community. And by the way, shocking that a UN resolution wouldn't be holding. But I think that yeah, it's stunning. But I think the idea that let's get a ceasefire going is simply kicking the can down the road. It has no long-term impact. If what people are really interested in is long-term peace and stability and improvement of lives for Palestinians, for Lebanese, for the Israelis, for Syrians, everybody, you got to look at the key problem here, which I would argue is the Iranian regime and the IRGC, since they are responsible for the bulk of the chaos and instability and violence that's taking place right now. So I think that the Biden administration obviously has spent several years now in an appeasement posture with the Iranian regime, hoping to somehow magically pull them into the community of nations, and it's such an unrealistic point of view, and shows a complete lack of understanding of the individuals and the nature of the beast that we're dealing with the Iranian regime. Again, not the Iranian people. But do you think that's all kind of a long rambling way of saying, getting to my point, my question with you is, do you think that sort of there's been a sea change within the Israeli government, within the leadership there, certainly with Netanyahu and the close members of his security cabinet, that it's time that they don't have the luxury of full on support from the U.S. administration, that maybe they do have to take matters into their own hands, and that maybe that's why they've decided after all this time, it's not that they just had this intelligence about the pagers or the handhelds or some of the command structure of Hezbollah, right? Some of it was target opportunity for sure, but there was some long-term intelligence there that they decided in this moment to act on. So do you think that signals some sort of sea change with Netanyahu and his cabinet, that, we're just going to have to deal with this now, regardless of where it goes?
Mike, that was all really well said. Yeah, I do. I mean, you talk about kicking the can down the road. We're at the end of the road. There's no more road. And I think that's the Israeli perspective here. This cannot be allowed to happen again. And they can't trust anyone else to do this for them. Unfortunately, it's Israel has to handle this. And so, yeah, I do think the calculation has been made. It's just it'll be interesting to see. I think it really, for me, kind of, um, I everything really became clear to me in Bibi's speech the other night, Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech, where he was addressing directly the Iranian people. Why would he be doing that if there wasn't something significant coming? And he was messaging that it's not going to be against you.
Yeah.
I think I think, to me and you with our backgrounds in national security, I mean, to me that was clearly the beginning of something that will be unfolding in the days and weeks to come. And that was a really important address that he made. And I just don't see they're not going back to status quo.
Yeah.
And of course, we're right up against the US presidential election. So here at home, everything's about domestic political considerations. And I'm not excusing what this White House has done because I think it's horrific. And I think a lot of other US partners have been taking notes about I mean, there's a whole laundry list of terrible foreign policy decisions these guys have made the last 4 years. But this is this is just another in a long line. And I
Yeah.
think it's also showing, unfortunately, it's putting questions in people's minds, like, are we a reliable partner? And unfortunately, I think Israel's quiet answer to this is like no, or at least not at this moment. And so I hope that we rise to the occasion. I hope that we support whatever it is they're planning to do if they ask us for help. But I don't know. I can't say with certainty that we will. I hate to say that, but
Yeah,
it's
no,
the truth.
it's a sad thing to say. It's a disappointing thing to say. And because there's a long history here that should be.
Israeli, sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt you, but just to make the
yeah,
point, I mean, they've saved a lot of American lives over the years. Like during the GWAT, we
mhm,
got a lot of great intelligence from them that kept our
absolutely.
people alive,
Yeah, no,
by the way.
absolutely. Simone, I hate to do this. We're going to have to take a quick break because we've got some excellent sponsors and we're going to hear from them. But then we'll be right back with more. Hey, Mike Baker here. Every day we hear more about surveillance and how our right to privacy is being infringed upon. Well, that's true. It is. And look, it feels like we're living in a world where nothing is truly private anymore. I mean, most of us, frankly, for the sake of convenience, hand over our personal information without a second thought, right? You're signing up for services, you're shopping online, or you're using social media. And I know you use social media. But this convenience comes at a cost. Now, it's time for us to take a stand and fight back for our right to privacy. And one tool that's been essential for me in this fight is the all-in-one privacy app, and that's called MySudo, MySudo, MySudo. It's an app that lets you create multiple digital identities with separate phone numbers and emails so you can keep your personal information private, right? And in this age of constant surveillance, well, having MySudo is crucial. Now, for my listeners, I've got a special deal. Go to mysudo.com/Mike Baker and use code, are you ready for this? The code is Mike Baker to get 30 days free on a Sudo Pro yearly subscription. Take back your privacy with MySudo. Trust me, it's worth it. Welcome back to the PDB Situation Report. Joining me once again is Simone Ledeen, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. And not surprisingly, we're talking about, well, the Middle East. Simone, what is your biggest concern in the moment? Is it the retaliatory strike by Israel against Iran after this ballistic missile attack? Is it what's happening in Hezbollah? Is it what's happening in Gaza still? Where is your immediate focus?
I'm actually really concerned about our forces in the region. We have forces, of course, scattered across the region. I mean, some are more in harm's way than others. I'm also concerned about our citizens. We have a large community of Americans in Lebanon, and there hasn't been a NEO to evacuate them. I know they're quietly exiting the country, but it's increasingly difficult. And I think we're viewed by the Iranian regime and its proxies as an extension. Israel's an extension of us, actually.
Mm-hmm.
The great Satan and the little Satan. We're the great Satan, and our troops have come under fire a lot over the years from many of these proxies in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. We still have the Houthi issue in the Red Sea. So I think we're really our forces are really at risk right now, and the fact that our political leadership is like really hesitant to take any action has actually made it a lot more dangerous for them. So that's really, if you ask what am I most worried about, I'm worried about our men and women in harm's way at the moment.
Yeah. Well, although I do remember Kamala Harris saying during the debate that we didn't have any troops in harm's way or in combat zones, or I forget how she exactly phrased it, but it was an interesting comment. I suspect she'd like to take that one back. But I take your point, and I think all of us are thinking about our personnel that are stationed out there. When you look at the current environment, right, with what's happening in not just in Israel but throughout the Middle East region, and you talk about U.S. foreign policy. Do you see, and we don't spend a lot of time talking politics here on the PDB or with the Situation Report, so I don't want to get too far in that move, but do you see a significant difference between the Harris foreign policy and the Trump foreign policy, specifically with the Middle East?
I mean, yes. Yes, I do.
There you go. There you go. There's your answer. So that was nice and concise. Okay, no, please elaborate if you could.
I'd be happy to. Yeah, I mean, clearly there is. I think in the Trump administration, we did have a much different view of the region, and it was clear to us, and it is still clear to me that Israel can rise to be like the power in the region, and all of our Gulf partners, almost all of our Gulf partners, really want to do business with them in all ways. You know what I mean? They're seeing the successes on the battlefield, Israeli successes on the battlefield, and they're just like chomping at the bit. They want to benefit from all of this innovation as well. And they want deep security partnerships with Israel. And that was something that I think we did a good job of not only recognizing in the Trump administration, but also encouraging. And, the end result was the Abraham Accords. Mm-hmm. And so I think, turn the page, October 7th happened, and all of these horrible, sad things that have happened since. We can get into a deeper conversation about why that was, but I think it goes back to the different foreign policies of the different administrations, which was Trump, for whatever you think of Trump, recognized that appeasement is not a solution. I mean, he walked back from the JCPOA because there was a lot of evidence that showed that the Iranian regime was still building nuclear weapons, or they were still building a nuclear capability. And we know they already have this extensive missile capability. So turning them into weapons, once you have the capability, it's like not that deep.
Yeah,
It's not difficult.
I was always surprised about that because part of the I think the confusion was that a lot of people didn't understand that agreement in part was written at the behest of the Iranian regime. So the idea that we were going to trust but verify what we were seeing, built into that agreement was the inability to monitor and to verify what was happening in a number of very important sites that were kept off of that agreement at the insistence of the Iranian regime. So, again, John Kerry could stand there and say, well, we trust, but we verify. Well, yeah, that's good, if you can verify all the various locations and sites and important facilities. But we didn't have that luxury. So that agreement's always, I think there was some confusion over that on the people who say, wow, but how did we dare back out of an agreement that like that now look, but anyway, but I you know what, I'll climb down off my soapbox now, Simone. I think, actually, let's look at the recent attack again. Let's go right back and with the time that we've got left. To what degree can you talk about the U.S. military's assistance in this latest missile attack by Iran against Israel? To what part did the U.S. play with all our resources that are sitting out there right now?
My understanding is that our forces are authorized to assist with defensive actions and intelligence sharing that helps with defense, the air and missile defense. So I don't know the specifics if we actually were involved in knocking down some of the missiles. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be surprised to learn that we were, or that we were involved in providing like real-time intelligence on what's coming from where. But the Israelis have a really, they have a world-class capability. Everyone else is salivating watching the Iron Dome work its magic the other night. But everyone wants Iron Dome now. But it's, what the Israelis need help with is replenishment. That's what they need. We produce those rockets here that they use in the Iron Dome, and that was part of an agreement, a couple of administrations ago. Right. So, withholding those rockets and withholding other material as well in an attempt to regain some kind of leverage over Israel at a time when they are under existential threat, it's a bad look. Yeah. And that's really what they need help with. That's really what the U.S. should be doing above all, in my opinion.
Okay. Last question, Simone, with the tiny bit of time we've got left. And it's both a simplistic question and an unfair question. Those are my favorite kind. What's your prediction for a timeline for an Israeli retaliation as a result of this Iranian attack?
Interesting question. So let's break it down a little bit. Do I think it'll be one action like this volley of missiles the other night? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. I think they might take some time preparing the battlefield and, doing like last night, I believe they took out a couple of Quds Force leaders in Syria. I think we might see a couple of things like that before they take whatever significant action they're going to take. They've shown strategic patience. And so I believe we'll be seeing that still. But like I said before, we have an election coming up, and regardless of who wins, we are going to have a change in administration. And so I think they have an eye on that as well. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that means they're going to have to complete everything before the election, before the inauguration. I don't know. But I do think that is part of their calculus as they look to respond to this and hopefully start, a new day in the Middle East, which I think many would welcome at this point.
Yeah, including a number of countries out there. Well, look how optimistic we are. So a new day in the Middle East. That'll be our headline for the show. Simone Ledeen, thank you very much. Former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Look, I really appreciate your time. And hopefully when we call you again, you'll agree to come back.
My pleasure. It was great. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Up next, Israel's launched what it's calling a limited ground raid of southern Lebanon. This aimed at weakening Iranian-backed Hezbollah and pushing the group away from its border. Those are the objectives. Bill Roggio of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies will join us next to give us his insights on that. Stay with us. Bank of America recently said, do what central banks are doing, buy gold. And for good reason. Look, gold is up 20% in 2024. That's 20%. While the tech-heavy NASDAQ, well, it's only seen a 17% rise. In recent market news, disruptions at major brokerages like Schwab and Vanguard left investors feeling uneasy. So it's no surprise that Google searches for buy gold surged nearly 100% just during the first week of August alone. At the same time, reports of a breakthrough in Samsung's solid-state battery technology have sent silver prices soaring because you know what you need for those batteries? Yeah, you're right, you need silver. JP Morgan is forecasting silver to surpass $36 an ounce by 2025. Now, call the proud Americans of the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. Mention PDB, and you'll always get best-in-class service from Patriots protecting patriots. Patriot Gold Group has the no fee for life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver, and you may be eligible for the no fee for life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Call 1-888-870-5457 for a free investor guide. Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer for 7 years in a row, and that's a lot of years in a row. Call 1-888-870-5457. Welcome back to the PDB Situation Report. Now, while the Iranian attack on Israel dominates the headlines, Israel has also launched an invasion into southern Lebanon this week. The IDF has described the incursion as, quote, limited, localized, and targeted ground raids against the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah. The goal of the invasion is to push Hezbollah forces farther away from the Israeli border and target the group's infrastructure, including weapon stockpiles and rocket launch sites. Now, the IDF has been quiet about how long the operation is expected to last, but U.S. officials have indicated that it's expected to last for days, not weeks. Despite a number of recent setbacks for Hezbollah, including the loss, of course, of its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, the group has been putting up a fight. On Wednesday, Israel announced its first combat deaths in Lebanon, with 8 Israeli soldiers being killed in 2 separate firefights. Okay, joining me now for more on the conflict in southern Lebanon is senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and editor of the Foundation's Long War Journal, Bill Roggio. Bill, thank you very much for taking the time and joining us here on the Situation Report.
Thanks. Always a pleasure.
Oh, it's excellent. Listen, there's so much going on here, right? I mean, it seems like the whole region's on fire, but let's try to start from 30,000 feet. Talk to us about this ground incursion. How significant is this? I mean, obviously, they've been conducting airstrikes. They've obviously had very targeted intel-based operations. But the ground incursion, how significant from your perspective is it?
This is significant, this ground incursion, because up until this point, we're approaching, we're 1 week, less than a week, we're 5 days from when Hamas launched its attack on southern Israel. The Israelis have been taking fire from Hezbollah daily. And the Israeli response has essentially, up until the last month or so, been a tit for tat, a response. Hezbollah launches rockets, Israel targets rocket sites, maybe takes out some low-level fighters. But over the last several months, Israel has stepped up. The attacks haven't ceased. Israelis, tens of thousands of Israelis, up to 100,000 Israelis in the north are displaced. Rocket and missile fire daily targeting Israeli military bases, homes, civilian infrastructure. So the Israelis have, over the last couple of months, have been working to. I don't want to use the word escalate because that is there's a negative connotation to that. But Israel has upped the price for Hezbollah launching these daily attacks, as it's right to do. The Israelis did not start attacking Hezbollah on October 8th. Hezbollah started attacking Israel on October 8th of last year. So this is a response. The Israelis just want Hezbollah to stop. And they want their civilians to be able to return. So going onto the ground in Lebanon is definitely a step up from where the Israelis. Now the Israelis are committing ground forces. The last war the Israelis fought in Lebanon in 2006 didn't go the way the Israelis expected. Hezbollah survived that war. International pressure after about 30 days forced the Israelis to halt. But this is different. This is a very different situation. The Israelis have to remain committed to this. If they show weakness here at this point in time, then Hezbollah survives. So the Israelis need to continue the pressure and targets. It wasn't just Hassan Nasrallah,
Right.
but key members of the military and political leadership of Hezbollah. Thousands of fighters were wounded in the pager and radio attacks that Israel launched, which was brilliant. So Israel has increased the price for Hezbollah in conducting its daily attacks. Going into Lebanon, it's yet another step. But again, the Israelis have to remain committed to this.
Well, I mean, you raised a good point when you mentioned the 2006 war, right? Because at the end of that, I think it went on for some 34 days. But at the end of that, essentially, Hezbollah's leadership and their command structure was still intact, right? They really hadn't been successful in targeting. And that's completely changed at this point, right? They've decimated, at this stage, after the past handful of weeks, they've decimated Hezbollah's command structure all the way up to the very top, including Nasrallah, of course. But are there concerns, whether it's on the part of the Israeli War Cabinet, the IDF, or here in the U.S. with the U.S. administration, are there concerns about what essentially is now a multi-front war, right? Because we have to remember, and it's easy to forget, but we have to remember that they've still got operations going on against Hamas, and clearly now there's this direct conflict with Iran that's taken front and center. So are there concerns about this multi-front issue and their capabilities, their resources?
So I'll address the capabilities and resources part of that question. Yes, I'm very much concerned. The Israelis, particularly on resources, are dependent on the U.S. and other countries for much of its weapons to continue the fight. Israel cannot produce the amount of weapon systems and munitions needed to fight a high-intensity war for an extended period of time. So the U.S. being its prime ally and the prime supplier, the Biden administration has not been, in my estimation, steadfast in its support. The Israelis have the will. I always say
Bill,
the Israelis.
Bill, can I interrupt? Let me interrupt you just there because it's
Sure.
I mean, that's very interesting. When you say they haven't been steadfast in support, could that be operating on two tracks? Obviously, from a public perspective, it seems like all the White House has been doing is kind of criticizing Israeli leadership, pushing for a ceasefire, certainly in Gaza, and now obviously with Lebanon, pushing for a limited retaliation or response to Iran. But from what you've seen, behind the radar, behind the scenes, are they still fully supportive in terms of the resources, of the hardware, the military capabilities? So, I mean, we're seeing the public kind of with the White House, and I think there's some domestic politics there. But from the important side of, are we getting them the resources they need, which happens off the radar screen? Anything to that?
Yeah, so the U.S. has at times held back, particularly munitions, 2,000-pound bombs. And other munitions, and there's pressure from certain congressmen, congresswomen to shut off all aid to Israel. This is something unthinkable just 20 years ago. But what is done publicly matters, because what this does, it's just, to me, as important as the munitions behind and other weapon systems behind the scene. Because what Hezbollah sees, what Iran sees, what Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad see, and the Houthis and the Iraqi and Shia militia see, is they see the U.S. publicly denouncing Israel or being critical or calling for the ceasefire. Then this gives them the it fortifies them. It tells them, hey, all we need to do is continue fighting. The pressure is on Israel. And then other countries become weak in their support. So that deteriorating situation on the political and diplomatic side, that really harms Israel in many ways that I think in a lot of ways we don't even understand.
Yeah.
So the other part of your question was, is this going to lead to a wider war? I argue there already is a wider war occurring. Hezbollah is attacking Israel daily. The Houthis launching attacks against Israel while shutting down the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden and basically shutting 90% of the material going through the Suez Canal is no longer going through there, increasing shipping rates and insurance and all that. You have Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and other terror groups in Gaza and the West Bank. You have the Iraqi and Shia militias attempting drone and missile strikes against Israel. That wider war exists already. Iran has been escalating from day one, has escalated this war. Again, Israel didn't attack Hezbollah on October 8th.
Right.
Hezbollah attacked Israel and has been persistent in doing so since. Israel didn't attack the Houthis. Israel didn't attack the Iraqi and Shia militias. This is Iran making a regional war. And somehow it's perverse, but somehow Israel's response to being attacked, to protecting its sovereignty, is the Israelis escalating. I just, when people mention this to me, I say to them, could you imagine if let's say the drug cartels in Mexico attacked the United States and the Mexican government was permissive or supportive or just didn't care? Mm-hmm. Could you imagine what our response would be? Would our response be to escalate after that attack? That's how we're treating the Israelis. That's how the international.
I don't know, Bill. Our response right now with the current administration might be they would just say, hey, have you heard about the CBP One app? For asylum purposes.
Look, I read an op-ed by Anthony Blinken telling me that the world is far more secure. So you're probably right.
Yeah. But look, I take your point, and again, going back to 7 October. Look, this is a conflict that Israel didn't ask for. It was not their choice. Do you get the impression, right, that after a significant period of time where the White House has been pushing back, has been critical, again, it operating on multiple tracks. Okay, fine, here's the resources, but for a variety of reasons, we're gonna keep pushing for this ceasefire. Which, in my opinion, and I've said this before, a ceasefire in Gaza or a ceasefire under the current situation, meaning the aggressiveness of the Iranian regime and leaving their proxies relatively intact, although Hezbollah has taken a kick in the ass at this point. But that's basically just putting lipstick on a pig, right? We're kicking the can down the road for someone else to deal with the problem. And our grandchildren will be talking about this and dealing with these conflicts as long as the Iranian regime in its current form in the IRGC are still operating under their same objectives.
I could not agree with you more. Here's the other problem that Israel has. Support here in the United States has eroded over time. I mentioned this earlier. The criticism that Israel is getting from congressmen is absolutely astounding. We wouldn't have heard this 20 years ago. It's become a political issue, how President Biden has handled this publicly. I never thought I'd live today to see this. Listen, I have no problem with questioning foreign policy and, what should the extent of our support for Israel be. We should have those discussions. But what we're starting to hear is we shouldn't be supporting Israel at all, that Israel is the aggressor, that Israel is the occupier, the problem here. And so Israel, to your point, Israel has to deal with these problems today. What is this going to look like 3 years from now? What is this going to look like 5 years from now? 10 years from now? Will the Israelis have the support and the capabilities? This gets back to, a point I was making earlier. Israel has the will to fight these wars. It doesn't have the capabilities. Could you just imagine if Israel had our resources, our manpower, our industrial capability, and match it with our will? 330 million people to recruit from for the military, an industrial base, oceans between it. Israel does not have those luxuries that we have. If we had Israel's will and our warfighting capabilities, we wouldn't have lost Iraq. We wouldn't have lost Afghanistan. Wars are ultimately about wills. And Israel hasn't, but it's also about resources. And Israel, a country of 10 million people with a tiny country, the size of Delaware, or, that is bordered. It's a country of sanity and a sea of madness. And how Israel expects to survive in 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years from now, as it becomes increasingly isolated. That is, to me, the real question. And that is why these militias, as you mentioned, need to take their knocks now.
Yeah, I think Netanyahu has probably come to a decision about maybe now's the time to make these changes. Maybe it's down to them, as opposed to thinking somehow there's going to be a coalition, because he's seen, even days after the 7 October attacks last year, as brutal as they were, days later, the narrative had quickly turned, right, to, say, look at the response from Israel. It's horrible. Look, you've got, the poor Palestinians, many of whom obviously support in one way or another Hamas. And I think that, along with then the following basically year of being attacked by a variety of the Iranian proxies, perhaps, and we can talk about this in a moment, perhaps Netanyahu and the Security Cabinet, the War Cabinet have made a decision that, now's the time to deal with it. Bill, listen, we have great sponsors, so if you wouldn't mind, stay right there. We've got a quick break coming up, and then we'll be right back. Hey, Mike Baker here. If you're tired of the same old coffee from those mega corporations pushing their agendas, and you know who I'm talking about, listen up. It's time to take a stand and support a brand that truly embodies American values, and that would be Blackout Coffee. They stand with hardworking Americans who believe in family, faith, and freedom. They roast some of the most incredible coffee you'll ever taste, using only premium-grade beans, roasted and shipped to you within 48 hours. Get that, 48 hours. The beans are sitting in the roaster, and then suddenly they're on your patio being delivered, and then they're in your mug. That's amazing. For the cold brew fans, Blackout Coffee is now also excited to announce the launch of their 2 new ready-to-drink cold brew coffee latte options. Don't settle for less. Make the switch to Blackout Coffee. Head over to blackoutcoffee.com/PDB and use the code PDB for 20% off your first order. That's blackoutcoffee.com/PDB, and the code, again, is PDB. Join the movement and taste the difference. Remember, with every sip, you're supporting a brand that stands for America. And as we say around here, be awake, not woke. Welcome back to the PDB Situation Report. Joining me once again is Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and editor of the Foundation's Long War Journal, our friend Bill Roggio. Bill, we were talking about southern Lebanon, and then we started looking at the big picture in terms of what Netanyahu and the War Cabinet in Israel, or the Security Cabinet, may end up doing. In terms of their response to the proxies, but directly to the Iranian regime. But I think let me take just a little bit of a turn here and drill back down into what's happening in southern Lebanon, because that's sort of the immediate issue that we're looking at. How long do you expect this incursion to go on for? Is there some sort of strategic, tactical objective? They want to push back beyond the Litani River. What is the objective here from your perspective? How long do you expect this to go on?
So the ultimate objective of the Israelis, as far as I understand it, talking to Israeli experts and the former generals and things of that, security officials, it seems the Israelis are intent on enforcing the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701, which means Hezbollah should not be south of the Litani River. So that's an area that spans about anywhere from 15 to about 25 miles of southern Lebanon. The Lebanese military won't do it. The UN security forces there, peacekeeping forces won't do it. So the Israelis want to do this. Now, if they are serious about enforcing that fully, they're going to have to commit several divisions of troops to do this. And that means we would be talking about an operation of several months. It's unclear. What I suspect the Israelis are doing right now is sending a small force in and probing Hezbollah's response. its leadership has essentially been decapitated and is in disarray. Its communication system is compromised and in complete disarray.
Yeah.
Thousands of its fighters were wounded in those radio and pager attacks from a week and a half ago. So how is Hezbollah able to respond to this? This is what I think the Israelis are going to probe and to see if they sense that this is my estimation.
Mm-hmm.
If the Israelis sense that Hezbollah is not putting up meaningful resistance, it may attempt to push Hezbollah all the way back to the Litani, but this would take several months. It won't be days or even weeks, as we may be hearing from Israeli officials now.
Right.
So it really ultimately depends on the ultimate objective. The Israelis may be hoping that Hezbollah, cries uncle. So that might be part of the probing attacks as well. The operations that the Israelis have carried out over the last month plus, killing Fuad Shakur the same day, who was a top Hezbollah military leader, along with Ismail Haniyeh, who was the head of Hamas, in Tehran, Iran of all places, the day of the coronation of the new Iranian president. And follow that up with the pager attack, that wounded thousands of Hezbollah fighters. And no doubt the Israelis were monitoring those communications for a long period of time. The radios, all of that. Yeah. I think the Israelis have been building an attempt to really put the pressure on Hezbollah to cry uncle here and get them to withdraw and end the fighting. That's what I hope that's not the case. I hope the Israelis do decide to take the fight to Hezbollah. It needs to. I just keep looking at the bigger picture. That noose is tightening on Israel.
Yeah, two questions to follow that up with, Bill. One of them, you've talked about this, and what you're kind of referring to with the pagers and the communications, problems that they now face. Look, there's a paralysis, right, that I think is now pervading Hezbollah and frankly Hamas and the Iranian regime, all of their elements, because they don't know to what degree they've been penetrated, right, by the Israeli intelligence services, right? Because those operations, the pager operation, the handheld radio operation, the targeting of Fuad, the targeting of Haniyeh, going after Nasrallah, all of those things took time, right? They didn't just happen overnight. There was years of work involved in developing sources and understanding the nature of Hezbollah and the Iranian regime even, and how they operate within the IRGC. So I think there's a paralysis there, and then the communications issue, if you can't trust your comms, that's a problem. So I think they really are at a point where I don't know that they're ever going to have this opportunity again. And with the Iranian regime attacking them directly, you could argue that a retaliatory, move by the Israelis would be something that would make sense, right? Would be a sort of a real crushing blow against the regime's infrastructure. Right? Not against the people of Iran, but against the regime's infrastructure and the IRGC. And whether that means going after their nuclear facilities, whether it means going in a big way after their oil industry, all of that is up for grabs right now. We don't know, and we'd be speculating. And I apologize because I got lost in a rabbit hole, which I do sometimes, Bill.
I'm guilty of it as well, as you can tell.
My question for you was, for people who don't follow this a lot, you mentioned briefly, you touched on, look, the Lebanese military is not going to do it. Can you talk just briefly, we don't have a lot of time left, could you talk briefly about the relationship between the Lebanese military and Hezbollah?
Yeah, so the U.S. funds the Lebanese military, but it's compromised. It's been compromised by, there are believed to be Hezbollah members within it, and it's weak. So Hezbollah is the largest military force inside of Lebanon, and it's not the official army. So even if the Lebanese military had the will to go up against Hezbollah, it doesn't have the capability to do so. It doesn't have the experience. Hezbollah is hardened by fighting in Syria, by fighting in Iraq against U.S. forces, by fighting in Lebanon, by fighting against the Israelis. It's a very sophisticated military organization. It's the most sophisticated in Lebanon. And so, again, I believe it to be compromised. It's weak at best, compromised by Hezbollah at worst. It is the Lebanese military is not the solution here. It's part of the problem.
Okay. And is there a scenario you see, right? Where Hezbollah's influence and structure just collapses, and the Lebanese people, either don't care or are happy about it. But what fills that vacuum without Hezbollah?
So there are rival factions sectarian factions within Lebanon. Amal is a rival Shia faction, and then there's the Druzi, and there's other Christians and other groups. The problem is that and what we saw after the death of Hassan Nasrallah is that, and who killed some of the leaders of these groups, they came out in praise of him and eulogized them. So the Lebanese people, again, I don't think they're the solution here either, unless Hezbollah is so weakened militarily and devoid of leadership. It is possible that some of these groups may rise up against Hezbollah, but I wouldn't bank on this. The Lebanese seem to want everyone else to die for their country.
Yeah. Well, and the Iranian regime seems happy to have their proxies die pursuing the Iranian regime's objective. Listen, Bill, this has been fascinating. I do hope you'll come back because I don't think this problem is going to solve itself anytime soon. Bill Roggio, the senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to having you back. All right, that's all the time we have for the PDB Situation Report. Now, if you have any questions or comments, and how could you not, please reach out at pdb@thefirsttv.com. The PDB team loves to hear from you, and I'm not just saying that. They love to hear from you. And as they say, keep those cards and letters coming. Every week, the U.S. Postal Service truck, it pulls up right outside the PDB's secret lair. We've got a special parking space for it. And Carl, the mailman, drops off more bags of your correspondence. And every month, our crack team of interns, they compile a batch of your questions, and we turn those into a regular Ask Me Anything episode. Now, to listen to this podcast ad-free, it's simple. You can become a premium member of the President's Daily Brief by visiting pdbpremium.com. I told you it was simple. And remember, new episodes of the PDB Situation Report air every Friday at 10 p.m. on the First TV. And, of course, on all podcast platforms and our juggernaut that is our YouTube channel at President's Daily Brief. If you haven't checked out the PDB's YouTube channel, please stop whatever you're doing and go take a look. Some folks with relatively good judgment, I think, say that of all the channels, ours is the best. It's informative, it's educational, and occasionally it's entertaining. And it will not, I promise you, leave you with that gassy, bloated feeling that you get from consuming too much internet. Give it a try. I'm Mike Baker. Until next time, you know the drill. Stay informed, stay safe, stay cool.